Hello, friends. Welcome to Science Talk. I am your host, Jim Massa. I want to discuss with you something that's very alarming, and it has to deal with seabirds. Seabirds are sometimes referred to as ecosystem sentinels, which sort of think of like canary in the coal mine, that they can warn of marine loss that's happening. Well, their numbers are declining. And if their numbers are declining, that could be indicative of the riches, the resources of the oceans also declining. So, what's going on here? Well, let's take, for example, murres or guillemots. They're common seabirds up here in Alaska. And, excuse me, as the temperatures are rising, both land and ocean, their survival rates are declining. And they're declining at a precipitous rate that many seabird species are imperiled. I did a video some time ago about emperor penguins and how they are having they're suffering severe loss of population numbers. So for a variety of reasons, the birds of the southern hemisphere, they don't appear to be having the difficulties as yet of birds of the northern hemisphere, but they do appear to be heading into difficulties. For example, the aforementioned emperor penguin. So basically, their numbers could be declining, but at perhaps a slower pace. So ornithologists, there's a worldwide team of 40 such ornithologists. They examined 50 years of breeding records for 67 seabird species, and what they have found is that as global temperatures increase, breeding rates are decreasing. So what could be causing this? Well, seabirds usually get their resources from the ocean. Conditions are deteriorating, not only on, but also below the surface. So they report in the journal Science that they use the data to test the hypothesis that seabird productivity, the numbers that survive each breeding season, would track what they call hemispheric asymmetry in ocean climate change and human use. Now, what is meant by hemispheric asymmetry? Southern hemisphere, there's a lot more ocean than land, so there'll be fewer people south of the equator. Southern waters are less overfished than waters in the northern hemisphere. There also tends to be lower pollution levels, not zero pollution, just lower pollution levels. There's also much more ocean that can absorb extremes of heat and more excess heat as well. So based on that, you would expect seabird survival rates, this is their hypothesis, would be worse in the northern hemisphere than in the southern hemisphere. And by the way, when they're talking about numbers that survive each breeding season, in fisheries, we would call that, a year class strength, cohorts, what have you. So, what's happening? Seabirds eat fish and plankton. Okay? Now, seabirds, the fish and plankton can move as the climate changes, but not so much the seabirds because they still have to go to their breeding colonies to raise their chicks. So they're limited in how far they can travel to find food. And if the species suddenly say, well, damn, the water's too hot here, let's go deeper, let's move more to the pole, or what, let's get out of here, the birds may not be able to find sufficient food. So if they can't find sufficient food, they themselves, the adults, might not get enough energy, so they would do a slow starvation. Or if they're able to breed, they may not get enough food to raise their chicks successfully to fledging, so that the year class strength of the chicks declines. And that, of course, leads to an overall decline in population numbers down the road. So, as an example, uh, MERS or guillemots basically must eat half their body weight in fish every day to survive. When a long-term marine heat wave hit the Northeast Pacific in 2015-2016, now Northeast Pacific Ocean means off the west coast of North America, almost 1 million of them starved to death. 1 million. Colonies also suffered severe losses. The pattern of change that we're seeing is not uniform. Surface feeding birds were more likely to be in decline. Birds like puffins that plunge below the surface tend to be a little better at finding sufficient food so they can successfully raise their chicks. Now, sometimes some species of birds do travel long distance, right? The Arctic tern's famous example, going from pole to pole, basically. They go from hemisphere to hemisphere, basically chasing their food. Well, this also makes them sensitive to changes such as changes in ocean productivity, often over a large area, changes in temperature. And they're competing with us. They also get caught in fishing nets. They're eating plastic, not deliberately, of course, but they're ingesting plastic. I've done videos on that. So you take all these factors together, and it's increasing the mortality rates of these birds. Stormier weather on land, but the climate is changing. Crazy, chaotic weather seems to be occurring more and more in many places. So the stormier weather on land, the nests can be destroyed. Female penguins find survival tougher and are more likely to die at sea, so the proportion of male Magellanic penguins is rising. Well, more males than females, you're going to have a decrease in breeding success. The breeding population is about half the numbers it was 40 years ago. So I want to mention that Dr. P.D. Boersma, she's a conservation biologist at the University of Washington, she and her team have been monitoring what happens with the Magellanic penguins in southern Argentina. They've been looking at this for 35 to 40 years, and this is what they've been finding. William Seidemann of the Farallon Institute in Northern California, who also led a study about the seabird population dynamics, he said that it could be an indicator of worse things happening at sea. What's also at stake is the health of fish populations, such as salmon and cod, as well as marine mammals and large invertebrates, such as squid, that are eating the same small forage fish and plankton that seabirds eat. When seabirds aren't doing well, this is a red flag that something bigger is happening below the ocean's surface, which is concerning because we depend on healthy oceans for quality of life. That last statement, he's spot on. Now, one thing they didn't look at in this study is changing ocean productivity as it relates to the heating ocean. You have heard me discuss with you many times now that as the oceans stratify, if you don't get the mixing, eventually the productivity declines, if not stops. We are seeing that. We're seeing productivity of fish species declining. The fish species decline, that's going to impact the birds. If the zooplankton don't have enough phytoplankton to eat, then the little fish to eat the zooplankton and so on and so forth also decline. So you get this ripple effect through the entire ecosystem. And there are studies now indicating that we are seeing this decline in productivity, and I am attributing this decline in productivity to what's happened physically in the ocean. The slowing down of vertical currents, thermohaline circulation, the excess extreme heat being absorbed down to 2,000 meters most of it concentrated in the upper 5 to 700 meters, which is leading to extreme stratification, making it more difficult to get the mixing. Eventually, that mixing is not going to bring in nutrients that the phytoplankton need. This is why we see all these things going on. You have heard me say before in the past, the oceans are dying. Here it is. We're starting to see seabirds are declining, fish declining, and many people planet-wide rely on resources from the ocean for their food. So if all this productivity is declining, there's going to be less food to feed the people that rely on it. And I haven't even begun to talk about land crops and how they're declining, increased temperature, the yields are dropping, nutritional values are dropping. This is all going to lead to basically mass starvation, to be quite blunt about it. So this is just another example of changes that are happening and why, the situation is pretty shitty, to be quite blunt about it. So there's your cheery news for the day. Not. Thank you for your time. Hello, folks. This is Jim here with Science Talk, asking you to please subscribe to my channel and to inform others of my channel and of the work that I do. Please share to social media platforms that you use. Also, as a reminder, don't forget to click the bell so that you know when I load up more videos. Finally, I ask that you support the work that I do by becoming a patron at patreon.com. Details in the description box below. Thank you for your support.